right. How's everybody doing? David here with this week's Griscom stream. Apologies, trying to reset up video here. One of those things where you start a job like that and then you don't finish and you realize you got to stream. So apologies for some of the video quality tonight, but it should be more than fine. I hope you're doing good wherever you are. I'm not doing too bad myself. I'm still very pissed off about everything that happened last week. I don't think that people were overreacting when they saw that as an extremely dark moment in the movement of progressive and democratic socialist politics. And I'm more than happy to talk more about that today. Feel free, for folks who aren't used to these are more casual than our main show. So I'm here keeping my eye on the chat. I'll be happy to take any questions that y'all got. Just a couple quick things off the top before I jump into any of the questions. Don't forget that we're going to be in New York City on January 22nd at 6 p.m. At the Cutting Room, which is on East 32nd Street in New York City. We're going to be joined by Jason Miles, Ben Burgess, me and Matt, as well as our good friends Emma Vigland, Sam Cedar, and Bhaskar Sankara. So it's a pretty all-star lineup already. I know these tickets are really flying. So if you want to come and see us, be sure to grab your tickets as soon as you can. I'll put this link below into the chat and make sure. I don't know how well that works, but come see us. It'd be a lot of fun. We want to be able to do more of these. So it's definitely important that we have a strong showing for this first round here. But there's a lot of things to get to. I'm going to answer some questions. I think Autumn has already sort of asked the main one of the day that I think is on everybody's mind as to what is happening right now in Peru. And we're definitely going to be, right now, Matt and I are really trying to get a guest on who could maybe talk about both Argentina and Peru. Hopefully somebody who's there. We've reached out to a few folks. I think a lot of people, it's understandable, are sort of busy. So we're going to keep trying. If anyone has any suggestions of people, please reach out to us, because we definitely want to be able to do a really in-depth look at both of what's happening in Argentina and what's happening in Peru. But what happened, in Peru yesterday is pretty historic and important. We covered that election pretty closely, so I think we can break some of it down for y'all now before we're able to do like a full show on it, like we probably are hoping to do next week. We'll start at the end and then go to the beginning. Basically, what's happened is that Castillo, the former president now of Peru, tried to dissolve Congress before they could vote to impeach him as president. It was one of those things where you first started hearing the news that he had announced that he is temporarily shutting down Congress. And within something like an hour or so, he had been arrested. So it was an attempt to eradicate Congress to protect himself from a very likely impeachment vote. But it seemed that he didn't have the military and security apparatus support that you need to be able to successfully pull something like that off. And now there's the vice president is being sworn in as a new president who's calling for a political truce in the country, which is very politically divided. If you remember our election coverage there, between the kind of right wing, very much like authoritarian neoliberal movement, and a left wing movement that has been trying to find its footings. And one of the things about Castillo is, while there was a lot of high hopes with him, beating out a member of the Fujimori family who was whose father was a dictator in the country for a very long time, it very clearly and quickly became a situation where the right wing initially, when Castillo gets elected, they start saying that there's election fraud. And there was an election fraud. I mean, that's clear as day. I'm not going to be one of these people who's going to excuse Castillo's attempt to basically eradicate Congress. I just don't think that that's a very worthwhile a thing to spend your time arguing about. But it's important to recognize like the context that led up to this moment. First things first is you have a right wing that effectively was trying to deny the election results in the country, and they were typical kind of things, trying to call for international aid and action to deny the election results that saw Castillo winning, and those failed. But that created a political moment in that country where, Castillo from the get-go was basically the right wing was trying to find ways to unseat him and to take him out of power, despite the fact that, he won that election. Castillo didn't play right. Almost immediately, he started to marginalize the left wing of his movement that brought him into power. You saw him basically turn his back on most of the socialists and the communists who were part of that movement, and was trying to find ways to hold on to power, but continue to sort of turn his back on large swaths of his base. He still has support, and I think it's important to note this too. That there have been protests since he has been arrested, calling for his freedom and for his restoration as president of Peru. But nowhere near the amount of support that he had going into the presidency, and that's because, as I was just saying, he turned his back on the left pretty early. He turned his back on a lot of the social movements pretty early, and he very much isolated himself from the political movements that brought him into power. Evo Morales, the new president of Colombia, and AMLO have all come out with statements effectively saying things along the lines of, the right wing now is trying to usurp democracy, and Castillo has made mistakes because he's been put into such a difficult decision. Take that analysis whichever way you will, but that's basically has been the line from the major leaders of pink tide and left-wing governments in the region. Arce, the president of Bolivia, also has a similar statement like that out there. And it's truly tragic. It's tragic in the sense that the right wing basically has been trying to undermine democracy in the country, and it's tragic in the sense that Castillo, facing that, wasn't able to build off of the support that he had, wasn't able to sort of root himself in the bases that got him elected, but rather tried a very foolish and dangerous and anti-democratic move like trying to eradicate Congress. So we're going to certainly be covering this, more. I mean, as I think the thing is that over the next couple of days, we're going to see what the reaction's going to be like in the country. We're going to see what the government's looking like. From people who I've been able to speak to, one of the fears is, without again making excuses for Castillo's actions and trying to suspend Congress, there's a lot of fear about what comes out of this, right? Because just because he made this kind of mistake doesn't mean that the restoration government is by any stretch of the imagination going to be a democratic one. And it's looking more and more like that's not going to be the case. So it's a really, really tragic and dark moment in the country. Autumn also notes, I see what you say. It was a blunder on Castillo's part. I mean, it absolutely was a blunder. I mean, that might even be a nice way to put it, right? I mean, I think from the get-go, you saw that his interest in sort of governing from a coalition with the left-wing forces that brought him into power, he wasn't that interested in it. And just to remind folks, because I know everyone watching this probably has like different levels of understanding. So a lot of people might have not watched our coverage going into when Castillo was elected. That election was between Castillo, who is a union leader, a teacher, and a member of an indigenous group to Peru, against one of the most far right authoritarian families in South America. A right-wing force that has no interest in democracy, has no interest in popular sovereignty, and every interest in sort of trying to neoliberalize and invite foreign corporations and foreign capitalists into the country to continue to pilfer and take advantage of working class people in Peru. So in the question of that vote, right, Fujimori or Castillo, there really is no sensible choice, right? Um, to say that you're going to support the right wing authoritarian, you know, freak in that moment. This is one of those things where there seemed like there might have been a possibility of crafting a new kind of politics. There's a lot of people who are very excited, hoping that something was going to sort of come out of this. But very quickly, when he came into power, it seemed that all of those hopes were misplaced. But that doesn't mean that you should have done what you saw a lot of American liberals doing, basically saying, we reluctantly support the authoritarian far right in the country against Castillo. It's a part of a longer game. And the thing is too, is that again, the move to dissolve Congress is just, it's inexcusable. It's certainly a strategic blunder. It's a political and moral one as well. But it's important to recognize the context here is that effectively you had a right-wing government right-wing members of Congress who were trying to use every weapon at their disposal to try to nullify and eradicate, the Democratic majority of that country beforehand. Right. That's what all these impeachments were. They were, fairly trivial. I don't think that Castillo is somebody who has as a clean hands as a Lula or an Evo Morales or somebody like that. But the kind of thing that you're looking for something so that you can nullify election results that you didn't like. Again, it's not an excuse for what Castillo did. It's just recognizing that there's just a fundamental democracy crisis in the country that started long before Castillo made his failed coup attempt. But again, I'm really looking forward to talking to more people. Those are just my kind of immediate thoughts. I'm certainly excited to be able to talk to more people who spend a little bit more time following Peruvian politics than we're able to here. But we did talk about that along the show, so I think it's only right that we answer some questions about it. I'm really happy. I feel like after what happened with the DSA vote on the railroad strike, I'm really happy to talk about a lot of things. I mean, first principle stuff, honestly, I think is a kind of moment that we're in. I'll be, keep my eye out on the chat to make sure I'm not missing anybody. But I'd like for this one to be a little bit more of a, Q&A stream rather than me just sort of going off about things. If you watched the stream last week, I think I went on for about an hour and a half about the railroad vote uninterrupted. Daniel says, do you get a good sense of what just happened in Germany with the failed Jan 6 attempt? What does it mean? How serious is it? How should the German left move forward? I mean, it's certainly frightening. And I mean, we're seeing this, pick up all across the globe. I mean, first it was this kind of anti-liberal, and I don't even mean that in the sense of liberalism as a political ideology or political party. I mean, and in the sense of being against guarantees of certain rights from the state, beliefs in parliamentary democracy, congressional democracy, whatever you want to call it. We're seeing that really grow in a lot of places, and I don't think that you should take, for example, what is it, 25 folks in Germany who tried to take over the Bundestag and if I have my facts straight, impose a monarchy on the country. I mean, you see how quickly it was shut down. That kind of thing should give you hope that the popular support for that, maybe with the military security forces, this is just sort of what you look at when you look for any attempt to sort of overthrow a government like that. It doesn't seem that it's strong enough yet, but that's one of those things. If there's an attempt in the first place, it's something to be very worried about. The German left is been very lost for a long time. You've seen growth in the right wing AfD in Germany over the past few years, and even more worrying than just some of their successes, the fact that more and more of their kind of positions are being mimicked and mirrored by other folks in Germany. That's a scary thing. You've seen the party of the left, Die Linke. Die Linke. I'm always bad with my German. I'm sorry, friends. really struggle as well. There was a moment where it seemed like they were ascending. Not so much the case anymore. I mean, that's a country that hasn't had, despite these kind of spurts and things like that, a very sustained working class left wing alternative for a while. And when you have kind of centrist to center right parties who have been governing for so long, seeing um, the lowering in the standard of living for people, seeing the suffering that German people are facing, as fuel prices and things like that increase, it creates a really dangerous recipe for the right wing to be able to mobilize and take advantage of it. you know um, but yeah, would definitely want to be able to do more in the near future. But here we go. We got some questions here, so I'm going to try to get through these for y'all. Joe asks, any thoughts on what frayed remnants of the Bernie left getting behind Rashida Tlaib as a successor to Bernie? That aspect of Inside Out. Any thoughts on what frayed remnants of the Bernie left, frayed lefts of the Bernie left getting behind Rashida Tlaib as a successor to Bernie, to build an Inside Out strategy? I mean, I think that when you look at consistency, Rashida is probably one of the most consistent members of the DSA, like adjacent left in Congress. She's somebody who has, I think, pretty strong political instincts. Not perfect either. I don't think that what happened last week was unacceptable and unforgivable, and I think is one of the darker moments that we've seen. What happened last week is worse to me than a South Carolina primary loss for Bernie. When it comes down to the way I'm feeling about the state of this project, what lessons should we draw from that? Should it be to sort of have top down movements where we're following somebody who we trust, versus movements that are being built up from the bottom up, that are more reflective of like the base of like the democratic socialist movement in this country? I think that we fall into making similar mistakes. One of the things that is so frustrating about the kind of post Bernie moment, if you want to call it that, right, where it seems like even if he does run, the momentum and enthusiasm for another presidential campaign isn't there like it was in 2016 or even 2020. What what's come after that has been very frustrating. We didn't see that kind of base building that we need, and you've seen fragmentation. You've seen that entire movement sort of split, and you also saw that there wasn't a lot of like ideological coherence or discipline in that movement, even which you can't expect from something that sort of starts from Bernie Sanders saying, "I'm going to run against." Somebody who represents the failure of the Democratic Party. We're talking about Hillary Clinton here, and hoping that can sort of mobilize a new kind of politics. And it was very successful on that. But what happens then is you get a lot of people coming from, different kind of political perspectives, that aren't all sort of materialist, that aren't all sort of socialist, right? Sort of creating this front that is temporary in nature because it's built up around a political campaign, that being Bernie Sanders, attempts to win the White House. I don't think we should be doing that again. I think at this point, what we're seeing is that if you don't have political structures, organizational structures that can sort of create a cohesive block in Congress, political movement, then what you end up doing is sort of doing the best in like your locality, saying, okay, I think we could win an election against this person, and we're going to pick somebody we think we has the best chance, and we're going to sort of send them off into Congress and hope that they, maintain a certain kind of political line. And that has advantages in the sense that like you can find and recruit somebody who can win an election. You can mobilize the incredible people who do the on the ground work, the organizing work, to win those elections. But without a kind of structure, especially if you're operating in a party that's not your own, the Democratic Party, I think that what we much more need to be focusing on is building bottom up movements, like having people who are really rooted in these kind of structures. So having somebody who is not just somebody who's getting a DSA endorsement, but like a tried and true, for example, like DSA member, somebody who's gone through the political education of the organization, who holds the political positions of the organization. Because, like, you know, there's been so much confusion about the railroad vote from folks, because there's some people who think about it solely on the level of workers are demanding sick leave. How can we get that to them? Right. Which totally is something that we should be thinking about, and totally something that we should be attempting to achieve for them. But there's also this second socialist commitment here, which is that you think that working people should be able to control their lives. You think that union members should be able to withhold their labor if a contract is being presented to them that is not that does not meet their needs, that does not meet their interests. And should the state be able to step in to deny people that basic democratic right? The answer is very clearly no. And that's where the real failure was here, because at the end of the day, once Biden made his choice to try to supplant workers' rights in this country, saying they don't have the same rights as other union members because I'm too worried about what that's going to mean to the bottom line of private interest in this country. Once he did that, was there a clear path to blocking that in Congress? Probably not, just given the math here. So then the question is, what should the role of the socialist movement be in a moment like this when you're seeing workers' militancy? Is it to try to soften the hard edges of the hammer that's being smashed on workers' heads? Or is it to try to further the militancy, to further the class consciousness, to further the strength of working people, and clearly standing with them, not only just doing, for example, what people in union leadership are telling you to do, but recognizing that so much of the role of politics in this country is building this kind of class consciousness, so people recognize who's on their side and who isn't. And that did not happen from the progressives, certainly, but I think more importantly, the democratic socialists. And so anyways, when we're talking about like, oh, who should we rally behind again in, some kind of campaign for a presidency, I think that that's making the same kind of, I don't want to call them mistakes, because I think Bernie Sanders 2016, Bernie Sanders 2020, that's the right call. It's just, that was so right. And I was one of those people in 2016 where I was a little hesitant around Bernie, because it's like, oh, well, Bernie, isn't always committed to these same kind of things. Bernie's always talking about bad socialism versus good socialism, whatever. That's how I was feeling at the very, very early stages. But then you started to realize this is speaking to people, an alternative is speaking to people. And we have to continue that to move the ball forward, to build class consciousness and to build political hope and alternatives in this country. So I'm not saying that it was a mistake in 2016, 2020, but it is a mistake today, I think, to say, oh, what we need now is just to find another figure who's maybe younger, maybe appeals to different demographics, to sort of fix this problem, when the fundamental problem is that we have a class that doesn't think of itself as a class in this country. We have the vast majority of working class people have completely fallen out of the political process because they've been lied to, and they don't have a lot of people have what I call voter depression, right? They showed up for Obama 2008, 2012. They were promised a lot of things, and a lot of people's lives got worse. And so it was correct to try to mobilize people on that level in 2016, 2020. But the moment that we're in right now is really a crisis of a lack of organization, a disorganized force. So we have to be looking much more towards building the base than trying to find like the flag bearer. And I think that that's something that is going to require thinking about politics a little bit differently than I think we've been thinking about politics over the past few years. But I appreciate the question. Lenny says, will working class folks learn how much power they have? If rail workers and longshoremen went on strike, they could bargain for Medicare for all, theoretically, solidarity to all workers. I mean, theoretically, but like ask yourself this: do we have the capacity as a left movement in this country to sustain, like, I hear people all the time saying, like, well, what we need is a general strike. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, in the sense of, like, what we need is for working class people in this country to be able to use the tremendous power, the fundamental power that they have over this economy, the ability to withhold their labor and prevent capitalists from being able to, exploit them and suck up huge amounts of profits from the labor of others. Like, that's the fundamental thing. But to do that, you need structure, right? You need organization. We don't have that. We don't have that in the current union movement. Right now within the union movement, there are huge fights happening to try to democratize those processes, because there has been a kind of separation from rank and file leadership, right? So do you have that right now? No. Do we, as like a broader left, like a working class socialist movement, have the capacity to support and protect people if they have to face, for example, a period of time without income, right? Do we have these kind of strike funds set up? Do we have that capacity? We don't. So I'm not saying that it's wrong to be thinking about these kinds of things, but I think you need to be thinking of not. This would be like the formula of, like, okay, if everyone went on strike, we'd be living in a different world. Totally. But there's a bunch of steps in between where we are right now and where you are when you have the capacity to do something like that. And that's where you have to start thinking more strategically and politically about how to build that kind of capacity and consciousness and capability of doing that kind of thing. And that's more of the question of where we're at than the question of, like, would a general strike or large scale strike in this country be able to achieve certain things? Certainly, if you have the coordination, the capabilities to do those kind of things, we would. But the thing is, we don't have those capacities right now because we don't have the structures and organizations and class consciousness right now. And you have to build it. That's a process, and that's sort of where we're stuck right now. Ian says, read any good books lately? I've just been doing a lot of history. I just picked up an awesome book on Reconstruction in Texas. I think that's a really important bit of history to be looking at. We've also, if you didn't check it out, we've been reading a lot of Hall Draper on the Patreon side of the program, Matt and I, which I also think is somebody who people should be checking out if they haven't read. Any of his stuff. We have one of the essays is up to the public, the anatomy of a microsect, and also we just did Two Souls of Socialism, which I think people really liked. So check that out if you haven't. Does Germany's central position in the global economy hurt the possibility of a left movement? I mean, this is like classic kind of questions about where you are in the kind of global system. And I think that what hurts movements in Germany and what hurts movements in the US is the way a lot of these political structures of working people have developed in both of these countries to sort of create things like labor peace. There's obviously people know the history of social democracy in Germany. People know the history of FDR and the union movement in the United States, and those things create hurdles because there's a lot of the working class structures and political organs that exist in the United States and in Germany aren't set up to build a vibrant working class left, and that's the immediate challenge. But is that different? It's different in like a technical sense than what our comrades and friends in Bolivia are facing. But it's the same kind of thing. It's like, okay, here's where we are right now, and what vehicle do we need to be able to get to where we want to be? So it makes things unique, but fundamentally the question is sort of the same. This is a good question from Unhelpful Heap. He says, with the new push to bring industrial jobs back to the United States, most of them are coming from Europe. Will we see U.S. and Europe tensions increase because of this? I mean, I think you're already starting to see um, the EU and the United States butt heads, or if anything, the European Union basically not wanting to be a junior partner of American hegemony. Now, how far would they be willing to push on these things? I think is the fundamental question, because the role of the United States globally tremendously helps out the European Union, but you're seeing more and more interest, I think, from the Europeans to sort of push against the U.S. And um, I think that it's not unlikely to see some of those relationships start to degrade. I don't think anything to the level of being on the opposite side of the fence in the near future. But there's definitely going to be more economic conflicts, I think. Here's a good one. Brian says best barbecue in Austin. Um, I'm just gonna tell you my favorite joints right now. I really like Distant Relatives, which is just some of the most interesting barbecue I think in town. Interstellar obviously is incredible. Valentina's is one of my personal favorites. That's the one I go to the most, which is like good Tejano barbecue. Um, you know, and the classics like La Barbecue are always great. But I'll tell you one thing: it's like once you start doing enough of it at home, I ain't saying I'm better, but I know that I like my stuff a certain way, and um, you start you oftentimes get a little bit more interested in doing it at home if you're in the mood for it. Brennan says thoughts on a utopia where we never think about politics. I know probably most of us here are into theory and history, but do you ever think fondly on a world where only a few nerds are doing that? Well, I certainly do. I mean, I have a lot of other interests than politics. I mean, politics has been something that's dominated my life because politics literally dominated my life. Growing up poor in this country, continuing to be on the lower spectrum of income. The fights over healthcare, the fights over wages, the fights against continued consolidation, and power landlords have over our life. Those things make it ever present. But I have a hell of a lot of other interests that I would sometimes wish that I could be dedicating more of my time to. Um, but I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm sorry to be a bummer. I do actually very much agree with Bhaskar Sankara. He said this years ago on TMBS to us that sometimes there's this kind of end of history narrative within the socialist movement where you know once we create a kind of socialist system, politics will start to disappear because there'll be cohesion, and that's probably not going to be the case. In fact, a very democratic system that we don't have today is probably going to be more politics, not less. But the difference there is the alienation um, will change, right? Because right now we're alienated from our government, our representatives, because they don't represent us, right? We don't have the levers of power to be able to influence politics. So what politics is trying to fumble around right now and trying to find ways to influence it. Or like your personal convictions and opinions on these questions oftentimes aren't really filtered into the system. Under a system that was much more representative and socialist, like there would be plenty of politics and plenty of fights, but the difference would be our alienation to that question would would shift dramatically. So it wouldn't be the same kind of energy that we put into it now, because right now it's like just desperation, versus then it would be a system of like debate and mobilization and things of that nature that we don't really have that opportunity now. But I do think living in a nice social system where our needs are met would also make the stakes of these things a little bit a little bit less life or death too. And our friend Sune is here talking about Germany. Says tensions in Germany are very high. The coup planners have in Germany believes the German constitution is invalid because Germany is under U.S. military occupation. I mean, what a day yesterday was, y'all. Would definitely like to um, we're way overdue for a Germany Europe episode. Jay says it's crazy. I was on a call with some Queens members talking about the exact same thing. I'm sorry, I might be a little delayed, so I'm not sure, but I'm glad to hear we're on the same mentality. And Bill says strikes are supposed to be disruptive. I mean, again, I'm sorry, it might be a little bit of delay, so you might have been reacting to something else. I mean, undoubtedly, they're disruptive. That is the point. I don't disagree with that. Um, and if you're looking for a Christmas present, Jules, you can snag it at leftreckoning.com. I initially thought Hall Draper was a Madman character. Yeah, he does have a name like that, doesn't he? I love one thing I love about Hall Draper, because usually when we're doing like our Marxist theory readings, we're reading a European. No offense to our friends in Europe, but there's so many just good Americanisms in Hall Draper's writing. It's just it's it's funny when you start to realize that as you get to meet people from other countries, which is a really wonderful and eye-opening experience, but sort of recognizing it's like, oh yeah, I sort of talk and think sometimes like an American. In some ways that's good, some ways that's not the best, but um okay, I see Lenny's question. I'm going to jump to that in 1 second. I just want to make sure I'm keeping up with things. And hell yeah, thanks for coming by, Strom. Lenny says, do we, as leftists, focus on taking over existing organizations such as the Democratic Party, unions, local governments, or do we build left organizations from the ground up? What would be more feasible? Well, I think sometimes too, people sort of miss what the DSA strategy was when it comes to the Democratic Party, which is something called the dirty break strategy, where it's just like you build up enough of a momentum and a movement that's coherent as its own political force, but it's utilizing the kind of advantages that come with the Democratic Party ballot line. And you use that to continue to build momentum, because we've seen in this country on the political level, right? That's what we're talking about first. That just because the way the American system is set up, you basically have two corporations that control ballot access in this country. And if you can utilize, um, that system to get socialists and working class people elected, why not? I've never been somebody who gets really like the Democratic Party. We all know what it is. It's not our party. It's the party of the elites. It's the party of the wealthy. The cliche, if folks aren't familiar with it, amongst like the left has always been the Democratic Party is where social movements go to die, and you see it time and time again. The dirty break strategy was not that we're going to change the soul of the Democratic Party. We're going to turn Nancy Pelosi into a radical leftist or anything like that. It was, we're going to be able to build a block and a base that's strong enough, has enough notoriety, has enough momentum that, yeah, at a certain point you can say, actually, this is our party. We're separate thing. And then would be able to sort of utilize the high profile members of Congress and politics across the country to sort of build up a party apparatus from that. Um, that was always been the strategy. The problem, I think, is not necessarily with that idea today. I think it's that the groundwork to be able to develop the capacity, like the DSA members should, one, they shouldn't be fucking voting to break strikes, right? And so we're already on another level of conversation when it comes to the people who are elected right now. But let's just drop that for a second, so we can just talk strategically and theoretically for a second. They shouldn't. There should be there should be a Democratic Socialist caucus in Congress. So rather than a kind of block that we have right now, which is very informal, right? It's like a brand. Where did the term squad come from? I don't even recall. Right. I mean, that was something that was sort of put on them as a branding exercise, and it created a very loose and informal coalition. I know they're friendly and talk with each other, but was there any structure there? No. So like, there are absolutely, if that is going to continue, they should be. They can still be in the progressive caucus in Congress, but there should 100% be a separate one. One, so that you can coordinate activities and actions, and two, because one of the things that was so critical to me, and I think was continuing to fall away, was that if you are going to utilize the Democratic Party ballot line, the whole time you have to be making sure that the general public and people know that there is a very big distinction between the politics of Bernie Sanders and a Joe Biden, right? And the way that you do that is it has to be cohesive. It has to be antagonistic at times. I'm not talking about just marching in there and screaming and creating chaos for chaos sake, but it should be clear to the casual observer of politics that this represents a different form of politics than like the Democratic Party, and that didn't happen. Um, so when it comes to the dirty break stuff, I think that there's nothing wrong with the general strategy of saying like, who gives a shit about being wholly about a letter by your name on a ballot, right? But what does matter is if the people who are getting elected from this kind of alternative movement are starting to develop themselves as like a coherent and clear and articulate alternative force to that party, and that hasn't been as strong as it needs to be by any stretch of the imagination. Um, the other stuff, unions and local governments. I mean, I think it depends. To take a historical example, the early American Socialist Party came out of a series of breaks in the American left, and one of the fundamental questions of the American left at that time was, should you do politics or should you do colonization? And I'm just using the historical term. The argument was, is the 1890s, that there's land in the West that's not settled, it's affordable. You could go out there and just create a community of socialists, and just have like a socialist town instead of trying to win power in a Kansas City or in a San Antonio or in a New York City, right, where there's party machines. Um, that was wrongheaded for a bunch of reasons. One, because the fundamental concept of socialism is that we have progressed human technology, human capability, and human capacity, that it is now able to provide for not just the needs, but potentially abundance for working class people, and working class people do not get the benefits of their labor under this system. So we have to take over those systems and utilize them for the benefit of working people. Colonization was thinking that you could create a parallel system. You're always going to lose. You will always lose doing that. You're going to create an industrial economy from the bottom up. That's ridiculous, right? Um, and you saw it. I mean, who won? They split. You haven't heard about these little communes out in the West, right? Unless you're maybe a local historian nerd like me. They failed. They failed miserably. The Socialist Party was, the strongest left wing opposition we've ever seen in this country. So it's very clear which side there was correct, and they had, not only were they able to garner tremendous amounts of votes, but just their place in politics radicalized more people, and you started to see a lot of those demands that were put out in the first manifestos of the Socialist Party be put into place, not by them, by FDR, right? And I can't go into the entire history of all of this, but you see that had a definite impact on American politics. So you have to be able to do both things. Like, are there places where, it might make more sense to build a ground up union, particularly in a place that's been unorganized for a long time? That makes a lot of sense. When you have concentration and capabilities, it makes a lot more sense to try to radicalize these things and to build out from them. I think that we should, be building some kind of union movement that's much more cross class rather than, craft or industry specific. But again, you have to be playing the game to be able to mobilize those things. You can't just announce to you and your friends that you're ready to do it. You have to go to where the people are. And I think that then you can make strategic decisions about breaking or creating new things. Thanks so much, Kowalski, for the super chat. I hope you're doing well, friend. Oh, that's Sune's right. We've been actually, people have been trying to get us together for a long time, so that's who we should get on. That's right. Thank you so much for the reminder. Okay, let's see. I'm scrolling down to see if we can get any more questions. Appreciate everybody coming by today. Again, for folks who joined late, sorry, I'm trying to reorganize the studio, so my video's a little fucked up right now, but we'll get it right soon. Okay, well, I think I'll keep my eye out to see if anyone else has one more. But I think I actually got to the bottom um, of the questions, unless I missed one. This weekend, we're going to have Cuba, Deep State Cuba, on the program for the Patreon episode. We're watching a documentary on masculinity from none other than the alpha male himself, Tucker Carlson. So that's going to be a lot of fun. You get access at patreon.com / left reckoning. We're working on trying to get some international guests for next week, so we'll see what we're able to do. Ian has a broad question, but I think it gets to a heart of truth. I mean, do you think there's a reluctance on the left to change minds? Ian, if you're reading this, would you mind rephrasing it? Do you mean like left wingers being reluctant to change their own minds, or that they're reluctant to try to do the popular work to change other folks, the general public's minds? Because those are two very different questions. Yeah, and Deep State Cuba does always deliver. So we're always happy to have him on the program as long as he can. And while we wait for Ian, if they're still listening, to rephrase that question, I have to remind folks again that we're going to be in New York City with our friends Bhaskar Shankar, Emma Vigeland, Sam Cedar, myself, Ben Burgess, Matt Leck, and Jason Miles. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. We had a great time in Los Angeles. So come out and grab your tickets. I'll put the link in the chat again. I think this is going to be a pretty big one, and that's what we've been hearing too. So come out there, hang out with us, and meet each other too. I think that's a really nice thing about these, is we all get to be together for a little while. But Ian says the left's reluctance to persuade others is what they're talking about. Sometimes when people talk about the left in like a general sense, it can be tough because it's just like who you're talking about. I mean, there's people who consider themselves to be leftists, which is a kind of disorganized just group of people, different from like a kind of political structure like a socialist party or something like that. But I get what you mean. I mean, I think that there's the always the worry, and you're seeing it more and more of this becoming something of like a niche cultural movement rather than political movement. And you see that in just some of the ways people listen to the same music, they hang out the same kind of places, they might dress similarly. You have to have a popular contingent to any kind of movement. But that's one of those things where when you make those kind of complaints, it's like, well, there's a reason for that, is that there's certain segments of the population that have been much more are currently much more attracted to socialism because they have been so dispossessed, because they're seeing that their future is bleak, right? So it's like, it's not surprising that these movements are young and also have a lot of like urban representation. We have to get out of that, right? And I just say that because, like, sometimes people are like, well, this is the problem with the left, is that it's too this. Like, well, the problem is that it's not big enough, right? And then the question is not that it's too this or that how do we grow it? But I think on a larger sense, I think that there is I'll talk about one tendency, because this is a broad question. I hope you forgive me, Ian. I'll talk about one tendency that I think is not good, that I'm seeing pop up more and more, is this idea that socialists should see where the class is right now and basically just tail the class, and the working class I'm talking about, right? It's like, so don't demand this because it's like too out there or too different or strange or new. It's not what people are demanding. They're coming to this or that. And I think that can be a strategic mistake. Not that I think that you shouldn't be rooted in the class and recognizing what the working class thinks about certain political questions or social questions or things like that. I think that this is absolutely critical work. but people shouldn't be so timid, who are actively engaged in politics, to do the work of changing minds and conceptions about politics, and making arguments and doing that kind of developing of a class consciousness. That's a process, right? And that's an active one, right? There's been this idea for too long on the socialist movement that everybody's going to wake up one day, things are going to get so bad that everyone's just going to rise up, and we're going to be living in a social system in a week, right? And you've seen that that's not the case. And anytime that you've seen things be successful historically, it's been because there have been people who are activated members of the working class. People who are more politically engaged, and have done the work, have read history, have read theory, have thought about these kind of questions. Those are the people who play an active role, and like that is what the job of socialists is in the working class, is to be in it, to be rooted. So it's not being outside and demanding that people do the shit that you want them to do. It's being rooted in it and doing the kind of daily work of saying, yeah, it sucks, our boss is horrible, and that's because we live in this kind of system, and like doing that slow work. And it's not one of those things that like you're going to see somebody flip in a day from one conversation to thinking differently. But it's one of those things where if all of the people who consider themselves to be socialists are engaged in those kind of conversations with their coworkers, members of their community, then the amount of people who consider themselves to be socialists and think of themselves as socialists grows, right? Like it's one of those things, like that's the tedious daily work of this kind of thing. But like you need to be inspired, and to recognize that no, like this kind of timidness that I think we're seeing becoming popular, where it's just like we should just do accept things as they are and not actively work to try to push the class forward, is dead wrong. And again, like you don't want to be outlandish, you don't want to be antagonistic. You don't want to be like the World Socialist website, right? For example, if folks don't know them, don't even bother. But they were showing up in Bessemer, at Warrior Met, right? Coal in Alabama, where they've been on strike now for 20 months. You are having World Socialist people show up at the picket lines and trying to get the workers to turn their backs on union officials in the organization. And the union workers were just like, fuck you. Right. It was duplicitous. It wasn't rooted in them. These are people just popping by and trying to create problems for people who are already fighting for their lives and their livelihood. That's the kind of shit that you can't do. But should you take the position, for example, that most working class people like don't consider themselves to be socialists, so that we shouldn't call ourselves socialists, we shouldn't talk about capitalism, we should talk about fairness and all this kind of stuff. No, like building consciousness is really important, right? And that's the kind of tightrope that you have to walk, is between this kind of paralysis where you're like, well, we can't push for anything until like the class has already self-organized itself, or this kind of like adventurous thing that you can just sort of plop yourself down in a conversation with somebody and they're going to turn into a radical Marxist. I mean, a lot of this stuff is like social skills, but the other thing is, like, I think that you have to have the confidence in being able to understand that, like, no, like engaging in these kind of conversations and this kind of organizing is like how you do this political work. Any book recommendations on modern political organization tactics or organizers I should take a look at? I've checked out Jane McAlevey and Joshua Kahn Russell. Any others? Thanks. And I appreciate hearing from you. I think one of the best people you can read is the work of Leo Panitch. Him and Sam Gindin wrote a book recently that is fairly modern, in the sense that he's talking about the Bernie Sanders movement. He's talking about Jeremy Corbyn, and they're talking about Syriza and Greece, and taking some of the lessons. I'll pull that up for you really quick. I think this is one of the best books that you can read. It's not so much like a how-to organizing book as much as it is sort of thinking strategically about some kind of political movements that we've seen in recent history, where they went right, and where some of the problems with them came up, and starts to sort of chart a course towards like what a kind of socialist movement could look like. It's called the Socialist Challenge Today. Sam Giddin and Leo Panich. It's like 100 pages. It's cheap. It's a quick read, and it's using examples that so you're not reading about the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and all the different social groups in early 20th century Russia that you might not be familiar with, right? Like these are people who these are movements that you can understand. And I think it's probably one of the better ones to sort of get introduced into these kind of things. And Ian has a follow up about their question. The question is broad, but I see it in online spaces. I'm not talking about compromising values, but we still seek to move people from wherever they are, not by tailing, by pointing out bad framing ideology. I think that's fine. I mean, I think that people should be way more engaged with others than they are right now. Okay, I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing any questions. I don't like to do these too much, not because I'm afraid of these people or don't have opinions on them, but someone says they came up with a guy called Caleb Maupin. Seems a little cultist. Any thoughts? Yeah, these them Hinkle. There's a whole LaRoucheite movement, and for people who don't know who Lyndon LaRouche was, he was a bizarre cult leader in this country. He sort of painted himself in the clothing of Marxism. His supporters would beat leftists regularly, which would show up to protest and attack the left wing. They're back. I don't think that they're a very large movement in this country by any stretch of the imagination. I think they get a lot of attention. But yeah, no, they're all bizarre, and it's. I mean, their whole thing, Malvin's stuff, is that like we need to basically, just become like good friends with Russia, which is a bizarre kind of anti-Marxist argument from the get-go. They have like criticisms of things like degrowth that are fine, but they always sort of couch it in this kind of reactionary anti-imperialism, in the sense of like what you do is you support right-wing nationalists in other countries as coming at the as weakening American hegemony, which is no real socialist should be arguing that we should be lining ourselves up between right-wing nationalist movements in other countries. It's just it's completely wrong-headed. Yeah, and he's definitely one of those folks. Bill says they've been using the rail strikes as a starting point for conversation. I think that's great. I mean, that was something that I think a lot of people recognized. And people want more in the LaRouche stuff. Just saying, 'cause I just don't have the capacity right now to go through that history. We did have Brett on from Rev Left podcast, which is one of my favorites. I don't listen to too many, but Rev Left is one of the ones that I'm always checking out. Brett is, a great thinker, and I hope it's fair to say a comrade. But we had him on the program about a month ago to talk about the LaRouche people. I think it's called something like MAGA Communism with Brett O'Shea. So check that out. If you want more like history and information about these figures, that's probably the place to go. Sun Green's PMC radicalism emerges out of PMC class interest, which includes PMC's interest in extending its cultural and technological hegemony over the working class. I don't know where that's coming from. Who you're citing? The PMC stuff is like there's no doubt about that. There's like a unique part of the capital system you can call the PMC. I think it's been way overstated in its influence. It's one of those like, look, do like wealthy liberal comfortable liberals piss me off a lot? Yes. Do you see a lot of the reactionary stuff that comes out of universities that sort of presented itself as lefts? I mean, look no further than what's happening at the New School right now, where they're taking away people's health care and wages for showing solidarity with the striking grad students at the New School, and their president is citing fucking bell hooks, right? No doubt about it that there's a factor here, but I think sometimes you can sort of misdirect your energy to like, was the problem cultural, right? Because that doesn't sound like a very Marxist analysis of politics. That people, because a lot of the PMC arguments is like, well, the PMC is like this because they've been taught and socialized to act in this kind of way, and they like institutions and structures because they make them feel comfortable because they're able to work through bureaucracy, right? Very different from a kind of class analysis. Was like, why is the new school hiring people like that to do it? Because the new school in New York. Is able to pull in tremendous amounts of money, is able to sit on very, very profitable real estate, and they want to have people who can sort of dance the dance, and play the game to present a kind of cultural front. But the engine there is not PMC culture as much as it is like capital. So I'm not denying that the PMC as a conception, but I think it's become bizarrely dominant in a lot of American left analysis. It's like the PMCs are standing between us and a radical mobilized working class movement. I mean, that demobilization started long before what you could even consider a PMC consciousness or anything like that to be existing. And no, LaRouche is dead, which is why it's funny that LaRouche's stuff has grown in the past couple of years. I see your question. You're going to embarrass me by saying it, but P, I don't have a specific answer on that. I think if you're thinking about any kind of organizing around environment stuff, the best thing you can read is Climate Change is Class War by Matt Huber that came out recently by our friend Matt Huber. And if you don't, if you want to watch, you can type in Left Reckoning Matt Huber. We've interviewed him a bunch of times on his book. Lenny says, not a question, but want to thank Matt and Michael for bringing me to left. I became a union student and organizer in our last bargaining session, and my local won a 13% general salary increase. Well, congratulations to you. I mean, you're doing the work, friend. I appreciate, that you've been tuning in. I mean, it's wonderful to be in this community with all of y'all. I appreciate all of y'all so much. Yeah, I mean, look, it's your life, and I'm not an expert on where you should be potentially going for grad school, but new school is really nightmarish right now, and I've watched these union fights very closely. Nick on that says, been seeing a lot of actions in higher ed, University of California system, new school, Rutgers, and others. Thoughts on what is needed for that resurgence to continue? I mean, one, if you're in those communities, support them. I mean, that's it. That's first and foremost. But I mean, why are these things happening too? Right? They're happening because the class, right? There's the Marxist term for it, the intelligentsia, right? Who are knowledge workers, but because of like the university system, sort of get to sit a little bit outside of the production system in the sense that they're not having to like to work in the same ways as others. But as you've seen in our lifetime, that like tenure, right? So you're sort of pulled out of that relationship between bosses. Not that the professors were necessarily liberated, but there was this idea that like, we're going to have the academy, the academics sort of pulled out of society so that they can do the important social work of thinking. Right. But what we've seen over the past 50, 60 years, and it's only accelerated to come up into a crisis point over the past, 20, 30 years, has been the proletarian of those workers. And we were on TIR. This is Revolution on our cross stream last week, and we were talking to a gentleman who's at University of California, Riverside, if I remember correctly. And we were talking about the fact that more and more people, even the people who are on the more comfortable side, are seeing that more of their work, the work of like, being a professor is becoming neoliberalized, is becoming more and more privatized. The kind of privileges and advantages that they might have thought that they had going into it, or maybe even enjoyed at some period of their life, are rapidly disappearing. So as they see the oppression and abuse of like grad student workers who are doing the significant amount of work on universities across the country right now, they're seeing, oh, this is the same kind of thing that's coming for us, and that's created a lot of opportunities for solidarity. It's not perfect yet. There's a lot of, particularly people on like the higher end of the university system, I'm just talking about like tenured professors, who aren't showing that solidarity, but that's broadening much more. And yeah, I mean, I think as an outsider, what we can do is support strike funds, continue to make sure that we see, for example, what the new school is doing. We see what's happening at Rutgers. We see what's happening at the University of California system. Um, and Lenny says, I ain't satisfied knowing our brothers working the rails got fucked over. I guess that's the anarchy syndicalist tendencies kicking in. Well, wherever it's coming from, it's fine with me. But I'll tell you, it's like a Marxist. It's pissing me the fuck off too. It's been pissing me off for a long time. I mean, I haven't been as heated as this in a long time. I don't know about Yeshiva versus the NLRB, Antonio, but I'll check that out. And thank you, Ian, for being in here too. I appreciate you very much. Looks like the sex bots are showing up in the chat. Okay, I think I might run. I saw Daniel want to ask me. I'll just answer this really briefly at the end. He says, off topic, but what is your response to the notion that debt forgiveness favors the wealthy? One, I mean, it's not true. It's a nasty and duplicitous kind of argument. When you look at it's not even. I don't want to mess up stats live, so fact check me. But something like 34% of student debt holders, for example, in this country, didn't finish their degree. And what does that mean? They didn't get the economic benefit of a college degree, but yet are still sort of saddled with the debt, right? And so like these kind of attacks on for example, student debt forgiveness really do obscure the class dynamics in this country. They do like this kind of, the right does, and the center left liberals do as well, like this kind of image of like the college student being this kind of perfectly privileged character who's like doesn't want to have to work or pay for their nice lifestyle. But when you actually look at who holds tremendous amounts of student debt in this country, it's much more reflective of the general population, particularly, it's mainly young people, what we're all going through. But even larger than that, that is such an anti-solidaristic position in the first place. We were talking about with Kurt Hackbarth on the program about what's happening in Mexico right now. And this New York Times article that was, just filled with lies, direct and lies of omission. And they kept on using these kind of terminology, welfare programs, to talk about universal programs. I think across the board, this means testing bullshit fetish on the liberal side is incredibly damaging. These programs should just be universal from the get-go. That's the point, is as a society, we want to be able to provide certain baseline services to our population. That shows a strong and vibrant society. It creates a better one. And universal programs on our side, they're better because they're a lot more popular. They're a lot harder to attack, right? Because if everyone's benefiting, how can you say this group's getting favored over that group, right? From the get-go, they shouldn't have means tested the student debt thing. They should have forgiven it all. Same thing with medical debt, especially when we're talking about a situation in the United States where they have incredible fiscal powers. I mean, you don't see any whining, crying about who's benefiting from the National Defense Authorization, which they just passed something like upwards of $800 billion, right? Universal programs are the way to go across the board. Yeah, all of these debts, I'm with you. And if you didn't see it, we had a rep from the Debt Collective who's they're organizing on all these issues. You should definitely be checking them out. But anyways, folks, I appreciate everyone so much. We'll be back this Sunday with Dr. He is a doctor, but Deep State Cuba, talking about masculinity and the right. We're going to be watching a doc. That'll be fun. You get access to that patreon.com/left reckoning. Just $5 a month. It really helps us keep growing. Matt and I really want to be able to expand this. We had a big setback last month. We saw a pretty significant drop off. So if you're able, the support really does help us keep the show going, and help us be able to achieve some of those goals. Because ideally, we'd really like to be able to do more stuff on this platform, be able to bring in some other voices onto Left Reckoning, and some other kind of more long term goals, maybe potentially starting some kind of publication stuff. Anyway, that's all sort of contingent on us being able to grow. So if you're able to, please support us at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. And also, if you've been a member for a while, and I know things are getting tighter, I mean, just at the grocery store today, it's scary when you see those prices jump up. We do want to make sure people can still be in this community. So if the $5 is getting tough, send me a message either through Patreon. You can DM me on Twitter, or send us an email at leftreckoning@gmail.com, and we can try to figure something out so that you don't have to, lose membership to Left Reckoning. So we want to make sure that everyone can participate. I appreciate all of y'all so much. And check us out on Sunday. And if not, we'll be back next Tuesday. Take care.